Hey, everybody, welcome to another special episode of the Fantasy Fiends show with the Indie Fantasy Addicts. As you know, I am your host, Andy Peliquin, or The Giant. Today, I am joined by some awesome people to talk about thieving things. I don't know, have any of you guys, any experience at all with thieving things, beyond, lifting stuff from a store when you were a kid? But, have you ever tried picking pockets or picking locks or anything like that?
I messed around with lockpicking a little bit in college.
Successfully or not?
I couldn't get it. They make it look so easy, right? In movies, it's like, here, let me teach you how. You did it. You use a paperclip. Okay, now and then it's like random person who's never done it before learns it in like 5 minutes. Apparently, I'm not that smart because it's fairly hard, but it was fun to try.
That just shows that you're not a YA character. Otherwise, you would have learned it in 10 minutes.
Exactly. Yep. I could do that and juggle and throw knives within about 5 minutes.
Yeah. Even though you're clumsy.
Exactly.
You're always clumsy, but you can do a backflip and throw 3 knives and kill people.
Exactly. It's my origin story.
That's awesome. All right, and of course, joining me this week or this month is Justin Fike of the. Let me see if I get this. Oh, I'm so bad at this whole pointing thing because it's backwards. Justin Fike of
the Brady Bunch,
the Parkour Chronicle. There we go. Now this one's easy.
Guys.
Joe Jackson of what is the name of your series? The Eve of Redemption, is that the name?
Yep, Eve of Redemption.
I got it right now. And there we go. Ha! And then of course Robert Zangari from what's the name of your series?
It's Tales of the Amulet.
Okay, because I know a Princess Errand. Like we've seen the cover, but I never zoom in enough to see the series name. So, you know what? Why don't you guys tell us a little bit about the thieves in your stories, the ones that we're going to be talking about today? Justin, because you're one of the featured reads for the month, why don't you tell us a little bit about Charity? Is her name, right?
Yes, yeah. Charity is the main character of the series, and she is a thief through and through. Very much so she grew up as an orphan in this like kind of major metropolitan city in the old world that she sort of scrapped it out, and the city has a very, very strong class distinction. So she grew up as an orphan, kind of making her way, and has a very sort of rough and tumble view of life, sort of a take care of yourself because no one else will mentality. So it's been really interesting to sort of write, but her story begins when she's sort of dropped off a prison ship in a new world that is discovered, that's filled with all of the magic and monsters and mythical creatures and races that everyone in the old world has always assumed were just children's stories. And they get to this new world and they find out that they're all real and they're there and they're a problem. So she kind of has to, it's been fun to sort of write the contrast of this character who's extremely competent and very she can extremely take care of herself, sometimes somewhat ruthlessly if she has to. But then she's dropped into this world where all of the rules that she knew and played by don't make sense anymore. And she kind of has to use her wits and catch up really quickly. And so kind of taking a character who's extremely competent in their setting and then dropping them into a space where all the things that worked for them and that they know how to operate don't work anymore, and just seeing how that plays out for her and how she grows as a person and as a character, continuing to sort of use some of those skill sets and mindsets and different things that she's developed over life, but then have to change a lot and apply them in this whole crazy new world and essentially become a hero, which she is really unhappy about and very much not on board with, but it's sort of inevitable. So that's been fun.
I like that. Robert, what about what thief are we talking about from your series?
We'll talk about Tilthan. He's got a featured story that is the companion story to A Princess Errand, and he's very sarcastic, and he's a little bit of a philanderer, and so he ends up being very cocky throughout each of the instances that readers read about him, and he's really good at what he does. And he's also one of the few people in our world that has these magical objects that help him in his thieving skills. So he has this little rod that can shapeshift that he can use to help pick locks or to relock things or mess with other little magical objects. And then he's also got this invisibility cloak that helps him go invisible so he can sneak around easier. So
So is he kind of one of those, the greatest thief in the world kind of character styles, like Whitney Firestone from what are their names? Jamie Castle and Rhett Bruno, their series. He's kind of got that, that
he thinks he is. He's pretty good at what he does, and he's pretty cocky about it, but he's definitely not the best that we've written so far, but he is one of the best in our group of characters that we have. In our series, we have this band of adventurers that's led by Iltar and Kornar, and Tilthan's the head of this little thieving troupe that has 3 other thieves in it. And the other guys are pretty much just as good as he is, but Tilthan's a little cocky and he boasts about it. He's a fun character. People have really liked him.
That's awesome. And Joe, what about you? I'm pretty sure we're not talking about Carrie, right? The main character?
No. Well, She was a thief when she was a teenager because she was homeless, living on the streets. It was actually by getting bagged after pilfering some things that she got picked up by a demon hunter that just happened to be passing through the city, and it gave her quite an earful. And you kind of get to see a glimpse of that through a flashback in the second book. And that kind of changed her life a lot. But no, really, the bigger thieving duo in the series is Erin Olgarin and her boyfriend Elagos. One is an assassin, and the other is basically an infiltrator and spy who's been breaking into houses and other places he shouldn't since he was a kid. So he gets some pretty perverse enjoyment out of it. He has all the best motivations, but he's like a world-class thief. She's the right hand of an assassin's guild, but the guild goes a lot deeper than just killing people. It's all kinds of black market activities. They have a hand in just about everything that goes on in the underworld. So for her, being an assassin is kind of just scratching the surface, because there's a lot more to that society than I probably did not delve into it enough in the series, because other than when they get in Kari's way later in the series and she directly confronts some of them, they don't play a massive role in the grander storyline. But I could probably write a whole series of books on what goes on between the different assassin guilds, because there's like 3 of them that are always fighting with each other. So you get some fun rivalries like that. I was just listening to what Justin was explaining, and I'm like, oh, that sounds like the beginning of Morrowind. That sounds like a great story. I love that. Actually, dumped off in the new world in Morrowind. Yeah. I love that game.
A little bit, yeah.
That's awesome. I actually got a little bit of a BioShock Infinite vibe from that. In BioShock Infinite, you live in whatever sort of below the clouds world, then you end up on this new world above the clouds, and it's just like all this stuff that you have no idea. So you're sort of experiencing for the first time. That was the sort of fish out of water vibe that I got from that. For you who are just joining us and who don't know my stuff, we're going to be talking about Alana from the Night Guild series. She actually gets sold to the guild at 8 years old by her father to pay a debt, and she has no skill at all, and they basically break them down and turn them into thieves, like basically brainwash them to turn them into thieves. And so it was actually a really interesting thing. I don't know how much research did you guys do into thievery and thieving and burglary and all that kind of stuff?
Hang on a second. What's this girl's father's name? I want to go have a word with him.
Oh, yeah.
Raise your hand if you have a sword next to the desk, or more than one. I see 2 behind Andy.
Yeah.
I got 2 over there.
Did you guys do any kind of research beyond just like the character research, but like actually diving into what goes into thieving and all of that?
Yeah, for me, I actually did some training with Stephen Hayes, who was the first American to go and study ninjutsu over in Japan. And so I took a lot of my thieving stuff from the ninjutsu and from some of the disciplines that they employ. So
very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mine was more on the historical end, because the setting of my old world is sort of like a post-imperial Roman, like late Byzantine inspired culture. So I actually did a fair amount of research about not just like petty crime, but like organized crime, street gangs, and just the whole subculture of like crime and theft and everything in these huge metropolitan cities like Constantinople and stuff. It's really interesting. There was quite it's it's sort of one of the first prototypes of maybe almost like mafia society, like early prototypes of that kind of thing, and just how like entrenched in society it was there. So I pulled a lot of inspiration from that, and from just from that time period.
Pretty cool. Joe, what about you?
Mostly just from reading other books and watching movies and whatnot. Like I said, I didn't delve too deeply into how the guilds run, except on the surface. So, no, there wasn't a ton of research involved.
Yeah. So there are two things that actually are interesting. Number one is there's this book called A Burglar's Guide to the City by Jeff Manaw, I believe is how you pronounce his name, on Amazon. And this guy is like a professional burglar, a cat burglar, right? Sort of, I call him third story artists in my series. They break in through the windows and stuff. Sorry, I'm hearing my voice coming through on someone's computer.
I'm not hearing it.
Maybe it's just a short-term thing. Anyway,
I'm not hearing it either.
Let me see. I'll try muting. Anyways, so this guy, he basically dives into all of the various aspects of being a burglar, in the sense which is very different from being a thief or being a pickpocket or all these other things. Burglary is this very specific art form in the sense of understanding architecture. Like, you basically almost have to be an architect and then understand how to defeat it, and understanding people's relationship to walls and doors and how they feel like it's a sense of security. And I was like, this book just blew my mind when I was reading it. So I read it, and I basically copied whole sections of it to into the document, and then followed that, or sort of paraphrased what he was saying, what he was explaining, in a way that the character was thinking these things and stuff. And I love that, because it gave me so much insight into the specifically burglar mentality as opposed to all the other things. But what was interesting, I was doing this research into sort of the Thieves Guild concept, and it's basically a Dickensian thing. Like, Charles Dickens was kind of the first one to come up with this concept, because before the Industrial Revolution, there was almost no massive city population to the degree where you've got people actually organizing anything. Most of the crime took place in rural areas, like on the farmlands. You have a ton of highwaymen and bandits and things like that. You don't actually have a lot of inner city thieves. There are a few, but there's nothing to the degree of organized crime until sort of the industrial era. And that's, Charles Dickens was kind of the first to bring that to life in Oliver Twist. And so that's sort of where the idea came from. I loved that backstory.
Definitely. That's really interesting. I'm gonna have to look that book up. That sounds fascinating. I love when in sort of thief culture, when they go into specifics. They do that really well in the Ocean's 11 and 12, 13 movies, where they have that idea of specialized roles, and then they have to sort of work together to do that. I feel like Brandon Sanderson kind of picked that up in Mistborn a little bit, with that, with their kind of rebel crew that had this big job planned, and it's that same idea of you can't have someone who's good at everything, so thieves specialize, and then for the bigger jobs, they have to sort of work together and bring their specializations together, which then brings all these character conflicts into play and everything, which can be really fun.
Yeah. Or another really good example is from the Rift War series, Jimmy the Hand.
Yeah.
Yep. That whole storyline. that one was so much fun.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the one that most people who write Thieves, or who really like it, that's sort of their first big exposure to it, because that was so iconic. That moment when you find out that it's actually him as the guy who's running the whole thing. You're like, what?
Whoa.
What was kind of fun too was if I'm sure probably all of you guys have read the Dark Elf series, R.A. Salvatore. Yeah. Yep. Right. Yeah, he wrote the Crimson Shadow?
Yeah.
It was the smaller series he did that was about a human and a halfling thief that end up becoming heroes down the road. But the first book is all about their thieving adventures. So if you like thief stuff and you like Salvatore's writing, that's perfect for you. You should definitely look into it.
I love that series, and
Yep.
no one has ever heard of it. I pulled a lot of early inspiration from the Sword of Bedwyr trilogy, but I bring it up, and people are like, "Huh? He wrote a what now?"
I have to see where it is because I have the hardcover of the first book, and I bought it at the mall. And I was in there I'm looking through the fantasy section, and I saw it for the first time. So I picked it up, flipped it open, and he had stopped by Walden Books and actually signed it because he lives
wow,
just
that's
up in
awesome.
Massachusetts somewhere. He's not too far from here.
That's
Got a
super
lot of
cool.
people that live, a lot of fantasy people that live up in this area.
You know who is the most, in my mind, the most iconic thief of all time, and it's not the kind of breaking into homes thieves, but a pickpocket is Tasselhoff Burfoot. Every single time I think about writing a thief of that nature, like the kind of the street level thieves, I think about him, and I just love the idea of a character like that. Of course, Tass, is such a unique character in the sense that he's not actually stealing anything.
He's a Kender.
Exactly. And so I think that's why I deviated so hard from that, because he's so iconic, and anything I'd try to write as a street level thief would just end up feeling like sort of just a not as good version of Tass. And I think they tried to do that in what is it, the Salvatore series with Regis the Halfling. Like
it wasn't anywhere near as interesting,
right?
No.
He was nowhere near as good. Like Tass was probably the most memorable character for me from the whole Dragonlance series because of that.
Did you read Richard Knack's Kaz the Minotaur? Because that has Kender in it also. And it's the same thing. Like every night when they go to bed down for camp, Kaz the Minotaur, he's just like, if I happen to misplace anything during the day when we were traveling, you can just leave it next to my bedroll tonight. And when he wakes up in the morning, all of his equipment is in a pile next to his bedroll because the Kender just takes everything out of his pockets while they're walking, and he doesn't even notice. You picture you got this like 8 or 9 foot tall Minotaur, huge brawny thing with this massive axe, and he's got this little like 3 foot tall Kender guy traveling with him that's just stealing everything out of his pockets. And it's like, it's like the ultimate buddy cop kind of movie vibe with the two of them together. It's hysterical. Like it's a shame that Kender aren't in all of the D&D worlds because if you like thieves and kleptomaniacs, the Kender they're just kleptos by nature.
Did they not make it into D&D? Well, I guess they're a Dragonlance world.
They're specific to Dragonlance,
Man, is there a D&D sort of equivalent of them? Like I know there's halflings, but is there sort of a race that has that like abilities with stealing?
I think the halfling is just the general one.
Okay.
I don't know if Weiss and Hickman own like a copyright on the Kender. That D&D just never ported them over to the other campaign worlds like Oerth and Forgotten Realms and stuff, which again is too bad because imagine throwing a Kender into the Drizzt series. It would just completely it would totally throw him for a loop, especially if the guy ran into Artemis and Trari, and Artemis is like, all right, I'm going to stab. I'm going to give me my dagger so I can stab you.
I feel like the tone of like the Forgotten Realms world would be like way too serious. I mean, like Artemis Cherry, he's got like that dagger that's the sword or the weapon essentially that can change shape and stuff. That's like the evil voice. And I was just like trying to picture it, a Kender having a voice like that. It would be the funniest dialogue between the two of them.
Putting a Kender in Forgotten Realms would be kind of like taking Ant-Man or one of the funnier Marvel guys and dropping him in DC. Exactly. It would be like DC's too dark for those kind of characters.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yep.
Are there any other really iconic thieves that we haven't yet discussed about? I'm trying to think. I mean, I feel like we hit all the high notes.
Fantasy wise, for sure. I mean, you have the literature classics as well, but I think fantasy we've named a bunch of them.
One we didn't mention that I really liked was Silk from the Belgariad and the Malorian.
Yeah, that's true.
I don't remember that.
I forgot about that series.
Yeah.
I loved those books when I was a kid.
Yeah, Silk's got this kind of a, sarcastic personality. And I think what stuck out to me the most with him is he's so claustrophobic because, in book 3, they're down in those tunnels and he's just freaking out. It's the first time you've ever seen Silk have this weakness. And so it was kind of fun.
One of the things this kind of actually points out, though, that I think is interesting about like Thieves as a character type is that depending on the tone of the book they're in, the thieves either make like lighten it up or they kind of rough it up, depending on the tone of the book. Like if it's a more lighthearted story, then the thief is usually the grittier character who maybe is like has like slightly grayer morals and is willing to push things a little harder or do things the other characters won't do. But then often, like vice versa, if it's a dark one, then usually you see the thieves are like kind of the not comedic relief necessarily, but like maybe the less stressed out, like less brooding characters in the group. And it's interesting that they seem to kind of be right on that line where they can play either way, and it's like they balance out the tone of the story in either direction. I don't know if you guys noticed that, or
they can be like an assassin light.
Right.
In the sense of, they can have that sort of same dark, like, gray, or even black morals,
right?
But they're never quite as broody. They're never like they're often just more roguish than say straight up murder hobo-y.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's helpful too, because like a lot of times, especially if the other characters are the kind of traditional fantasy, like noble hero type. Sometimes you need someone in the group who's just going to be like, well, but like, what about the money? Or like, how are we going to, you know what I mean? Like has a little bit more of like a practical perspective on the situation. I don't know. Sometimes it seems like a character type that's really flexible and useful in a lot of ways, especially if you're writing like a cast of characters kind of story.
Yeah, that's true. Another interesting thing one thing that I love about Thieves and pretty much any criminal type is that you get to play with that perspective in the sense that the antagonist from the Night Guild series is the sort of the most noble and upstanding man in the whole city. Like he is the highest, authority. He is good. Everything that he does is trying to actually clean the city up. And so it's just because they're on the opposite side of, of the legal line that he becomes the antagonist. And even at through the end of the whole series, they snipe back and forth at each other, but there's only like one sort of moral flaw in his entire character makeup, and it's not even really that much of a moral flaw. So really the only reason that he's the bad guy is because she's breaking his laws that he's trying to enforce. And it's such a fun thing to play with perspective, because then you get the kind of thieves who are actually genuinely decent human beings, and then you get the kind of thieves who are absolute dicks. And you with all of that, I mean, so that's what drew me to writing the Night Guild series, that everybody in the series basically is a criminal of some sort. And of course there's the Law and Order guys, but you see the good thieves who are there, who just genuinely care about her and help her, or who care about each other and all that, and then the ones who are just terrible human beings. And you can play with all that whole spectrum, and so much fun.
You know what you just reminded me of was the movie Heat with Robert De Niro and Al Pacino. If you watch that movie, it's like a 98% chance you're going to root for Robert De Niro, even though he's the bad guy.
Yeah.
It's something about thieves that we root for them, even when we know they're doing the wrong thing. And, a lot of it in that case in Heat is, De Niro's character is the kind of thief that's like, we're not here to hurt anybody. We're just here to steal your money. Don't worry about it. It's FDIC insured. You're not going to lose $1, so don't risk your life over it. Just sit there, shut up. We'll be gone in 5 minutes. We don't want to hurt anybody. So, it's like, oh, he's a noble thief. He's not such a bad guy. And it's like, well, not really.
Yeah. Well, that's the whole, romanticized highwayman, Robin Hood thing, which was super popular. Like before Charles Dickens wrote Oliver Twist, there were all those tales of the highwaymen. And those were sort of the equivalent of, from before then, because that was who the criminals were of the day. So you have all those highwaymen who are super charming and super dashing, or, they wear the masks so you can actually see their faces. So people are like, oh, he's super handsome underneath the mask. And like, it was a whole genre of fiction of the day, these romanticized version of highwaymen.
Wesley.
Yeah, exactly. But I think there's something about that like there's something about living in society that makes you want to break rules. Like we don't do it, right? But there's a wish fulfillment element of reading about these characters who break societal norms, and especially the ones who maybe have their own moral compass or have some kind of their own morality, and I think a lot of times part of what makes those characters in those stories so appealing to as readers is that you get to kind of experience that tension between like law and morality. So like maybe they're breaking the law, but they're good people. And I think there's something in all of us that kind of has that in the back of our heads of like, well, I kind of, like maybe I run red lights or like it's small versions of those things, but the pressure of having to deal with like societal expectations and just different things. I think there's something really appealing about the freedom of a character who just says, what, screw all that. I'm going to do what I want, take care of myself and kind of like live in the shadows. I think there's something appealing about that.
Yeah. On the other side of it, it's motivation is a big thing. If a character's motivations are good, you can forgive them for a lot. That really comes into play with thieves. If a thief is stealing stuff because he just hates people or he's just a dick, as Andy would say, it's like, yeah, okay, can we get on with the story? But if the guy's like, if it's like a Robin Hood where you're stealing to give to the poor, or in the case of the hunter, the hunter punishes the wicked in really rather unique ways a lot of the time, which is cool. Elagos in my books is kind of like that. Nobody ever asks where he gets all his money from. He doesn't have a job. He doesn't work for the Demon Hunter Order. He doesn't have a job. But whenever something has to get paid for, he just pulls out these pouches. Nobody ever asks where he gets it from. Because, they look at him.
They'd rather not know.
Well, they look at him and they say, well, we know what he's like. And we know he doesn't do things, for the wrong reasons. So a lot of times they just... Even his brother, who is like Mr. Law and Order, just kind of turns a blind eye to it because, much like his sister trying to explain magic, he's like, I think I'm better off just not knowing.
Exactly.
Yeah. A fun sort of one of the things that we as writers have to think about when writing Thieves is, number one, what's being stolen, right? Mm-hmm. But then who they're stealing from. So this is something huge. that I did in the Night Guild series. The closest that I ever came to the main character kind of being a bit of a dick is that she's like supposed to pick pockets and she's terrible at it because she's just learning. And so she's not allowed to eat until she does. And she's about to like pass out. And some nice woman stops and helps her and, gives her an apple and feeds her. And I had to make her pick the pocket because it's not just a guy. So what I did was, okay, this lady was super nice, but her husband's a total dick. So she's going to pick the husband's pocket.
Exactly.
You can sort of, there's just enough morality in there. Have you guys done anything like that where you were like, oh, I can't do this because then they cross the line into being bad?
Yep. No, I think that's a really good point. The target matters a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and also too, what are they stealing, and what other kind of consequences are going to happen because of this? I wrote a short story where another group of thieves went and stole something, and they pinned it on another noble, and so it started this feud. And so it's like, what are some of the long-term effects on, from where you're stealing from? How does that trickle down to the rest of the story?
Right.
They used to do that. They used to do that playing Elder Scrolls when I'd break into people's houses and steal stuff. I'd put wacky stuff back. Like I'd steal all their gold and I'd put like a half-eaten apple in the chest or, a pair of shoes. A jewelry box.
I'm not stealing. I'm bartering. One-sided barter. Yeah, no, I think in book 4 of the Far Shore Chronicles, the inciting incident that gets Charity in trouble and sends her off on the whole adventure of the book is that she witnesses this family of gnomes essentially being like thrown out of their home because they weren't keeping up with their payments, and she's been bored for like 4 months. For the first time in her entire life, she actually has money and a place to sleep, so she doesn't need to survive. She doesn't really need to do anything. She has no idea what to do with herself and is going kind of crazy. So basically, on kind of on a like in her mind, it's like she justifies it as she's just bored and it's on a whim. But she goes to the villa of the guy who owns the house and steals a bunch, like goes and steals a bunch of gold and finds the gnomes and gives it to them. But it was this kind of fun thing to write where it's like she keeps justifying it as like she's only doing it because she's bored and it's a good excuse to like dust off her skills again. But actually, it's like because she cares and she doesn't want to acknowledge it. But even there, it's like it's that thing of like she's right on that, and she spent the last 3 months. Like it was a fun little sequence to write of like kind of her like seeing all these opportunities where she could have done something, but she couldn't quite bring herself to just steal for the fun of it, like just for a thrill. She didn't need to do it anymore, so she's like kind of going out of her mind. So finally she sees this one opportunity where, oh, thank God, like a reason. And she rushes off to go like pull this heist because she finally has a justification for it. But it was an interesting, like, is what kind of what you're talking about of like, until she saw a target that felt justifiable, she couldn't quite bring herself to do it just to have fun. Cause that just isn't her mindset, but is that same idea.
And that's another interesting sort of character type that doesn't really get played much is the thrill seeker thief.
Yeah.
Like we talked about the sort of desperado, need to steal to survive. We've talked about the kleptomaniac task. But the thrill seeker is another really interesting thing because they have a lot of weaknesses in their personality type in the sense that they're doing it for the adrenaline rush. So they're not necessarily planning everything's out in advance. So it's more of a crime of opportunity. So then like it can be kind of an interesting. Have you guys read any thieves like that who are in it more for the thrill?
I'm not thinking of anything book wise. Have you guys watched White Collar, the show?
Have you ever seen hell yeah.
I remember there's one of the antagonists, I think from season 2, is that like extremely wealthy stockbroker guy. And he's like, I actually think he was one of the more interesting villains because he's so smart and he's only pulling off his crimes because he's bored. He doesn't need them. And so he uses the fact that he's such a non-target. Like who would ever accuse him of doing this? He doesn't need the money. Yeah. And he's just doing it because he wants to. And that actually makes it so challenging to nail him compared to a lot of other people who are, for different motivations. I thought that was a really fun episode.
So they make a better antagonist.
Right.
Than protagonist, because I feel like a protagonist, if you lived in their heads all the time, like any character that is all about the adventure and the thrill, they kind of have like massive character flaws in the sense that, it's almost like an addiction in itself to do things. And then you rush things or and so then you get in trouble. It's a fun thing to play, but you eventually have to sort of get them away from it.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say I have a secondary character that is in. She shows up in book 2 briefly, and carries through all the way to book 11. She was an electronic thief because there's a portion of my fantasy world that's actually very technologically advanced, and she is a hacker. And she's a werewolf to boot, so it's a really interesting character. And she got in a lot of trouble with the government, so now she's kind of like not quite La Femme Nikita because she's not really an assassin, but she does infiltrations and a lot of thieving type things for the government since she got caught. And the fact that she's a werewolf she could be her own book series all on her own because it's such a fun character concept to me anyway. Yeah. But
yeah.
Hacking is a totally different area of thievery. It's another form of thievery, but it's a totally different personality in the sense that there's this massive amount of safety, this distance from the crime that no fantasy sort of thief could ever really have, because there's no way, unless you've got a wand where you can just like from Axio or whatever the Harry Potter spell was. That would be kind of fun. A Harry Potter pickpocket, who lives in the world of muggles and picks pockets with his wand or something.
Yeah, well, that's the thing is she starts off as a hacker and getting, talking about motivations again. She she was stealing from companies that she thought were shady and giving the money to orphanages and stuff like that. Eventually got caught by the government anyway, but now she has to learn how to be a thief, kind of like Justin's character, where she's going from, a technological level that's a little more advanced than we are right now on Earth. And she's getting stuck in a fantasy setting where she has to learn to break into houses and pickpocket and stuff.
Fun.
And keep the fact that she's a werewolf a secret for as long as she can. Because that'll get you skinned all on its own.
Yes,
Forget whether or not you're a thief, right?
I wonder if that would make it interesting, like lit RPG sort of Portal fantasy type. Like, you always have like these big epic things, but it's like a Thieves Guild style or like an Elder Scrolls style RPG game where you have to actually be a thief. I wonder if that's an idea for a good RPG
That's fun.
series.
Yeah.
There you go.
He's going to write that series on his next cigarette break. I got 55,000 words down
There
while
you
I
go.
was in the kitchen waiting for the coffee to cook.
Popped it off. I think it ties back to what you were saying before about motivation, though. It's like, I think it would be, I'm not saying it's impossible, but it would be challenging, I think, to write a character who didn't need to steal at all. Like, there was no need. It was just for fun, and still have readers actually root for them. As I think if like it's sooner or later that would, I think, push a lot of people to be frustrated. Like, okay, but why? Like,
Yeah.
most of the like protagonist level thieves that you see, there's a, like all of our characters, it's like, well, there's reasons there. Like, they're either the world they came from, or maybe they have to pay something on. Like, it's, they have to take care of somebody. There's reasons, and so then the audience that can go, oh, okay, like I get that. They're pushed into these circumstances and they're trying to make the best of it. I think it'd be tough. I mean, it'd be an interesting challenge to write the character well enough that readers would still like them or connect with them at some level, but it'd be hard.
Yeah, I can think of one book offhand where the main character was a thief, and he ended up becoming a lawman in a little town with his best friend, because they saved the town from something or other, so they made them the lawmen. So he starts taking it seriously, but the guy's like a klepto. So he just, everywhere he goes, he just has to steal something, not for any reason, and it's not out of malice. It's just something he does out of habit, and it keeps getting him in trouble. And it kind of got really frustrating after a while because there's no motivation there. Yeah. And there's nothing behind it. It's just something dumb he's doing. And it's like, you just want to slap him upside the head. Like, would you grow up?
Get yourself together.
That sounds so much like Wax and Wayne, from the new Mistborn series. I feel like that Wayne character, like the main character Wax, is very much like the Law and Order kind of guy, but then Wax is the kind of guy who steals stuff. But I'm trying to remember what it is that he steals. I think hats were a thing, right?
Yeah, it's hats.
Where he always had to steal the hat or get the hat.
Yeah, he's got to have a new hat.
And I love that, because that is exactly the kind of quirky character that is so entertaining.
Oh, God. If the names didn't get me, the hat thing definitely did. Wax and Wayne, professional haberdasher thieves. I
don't know. So what is the coolest thing that your thieves steal? Or what is the coolest things that they are, like they have a reputation for having stolen?
That's tough, because Charity's like one of her biggest rule. Like, she spends her entire life. She's the kind of thief who prides herself on having no reputation and not being known for any. Like, her mindset is like, only an idiot takes credit for something.
Absolutely.
And you just like, why would you ever, like, the whole point is you steal something so that you can eat food and have a place to live. Like, so she's pulled a lot of jobs, but she's a very like, she talks a lot in different situations. She, like, you get little windows inside of her head of like her thieving theory or whatever, and a lot of it has to do with like, she's one of those people that is just a good judge of character, and so sort of playing the people she works with temporarily off on each other, and very often like essentially letting them think that they won, and they trick the little girl out of the better score by letting them like make off with a strong box that of course is like, she's like, that's ridiculous because it's hard to carry and the guards are going to catch you. Meanwhile, I'll take a little pouch of gems and slip out the back and fence them later because they're easy to carry, like that kind of thing. So she never goes for like a big score or anything flashy. It's always very like survival oriented.
When you were talking about the strong box, I just got a flashback to the Robin Hood cartoon.
Yes,
I don't know if you get right.
With the dagger underneath.
I was like, man, where have I seen a heist like that? I was kind of like figure that out, but that's where it came from.
Exactly. Well, because like that scene is such a perfect example of like this crazy fantasy theory of like they're filling their pockets with gold coins that weigh a lot. Yeah. And they're like running around like they don't weigh anything, so there's actually a fun little bit where she was explaining to somebody how like she got someone caught on purpose once by like letting him basically like hold her at knife point, and then she like let him take off with the good stuff that she knew perfectly well was going to get him caught because there was no way he could make it out with that weighed down by all the treasure he was trying to take off with.
That's
great.
The crowning achievement of the werewolf character I was telling you about, what got her caught was she got really angry at something the government did, and she shut down one of their departments, signed up all the people that worked for that department for welfare, and sent out pornographic emails from everybody's email before she shut it down. that was her crowning moment.
That's a good way to make a name for yourself.
That is pretty funny.
She's not very popular she's kind of popular with the shadow part of the government that runs basically like the Black Ops sort of a thing that she works for. She is not popular with the rest of the government.
That's funny. So for my guys, so this would be in some of in the books that we previously published, but they play a very pivotal role in what is now going to be book 4, and it's our group of adventurers are trying to put together this amulet that can control dragons. And so they actually are helping steal one of the pieces to it in book 4, and they end up getting away. And so they're kind of the linchpin to the whole story, is these guys got to get out or else the whole thing falls apart. And our group's going to get found out by these other individuals that are also, well, they're kind of not quite the caretakers, but they're trying to repress the knowledge about the amulet. And so Tilthan plays a very pivotal role there, and is able to get that piece back to our other part of our group that's elsewhere in the world, and they're able to continue the adventure. But that's probably his most crowning achievement. I mean, he's done a lot of other stuff, but kind of like what Justin said, he keeps it low. He doesn't want anybody knowing what he's really doing. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of like, well, if you only knew half the stuff that I've done, kind of an attitude.
But I can't tell you.
That's fun.
Yes.
So I think Alana's got a number of achievements that are pretty epic for her world, and one of them, she's going after this sarcophagus, which is like worth like $1 million, gold, whatever the thing is, which is like super expensive. But this thing is, solid gold and gemstones, so there's no way she can carry it. So the plot of the whole second book is her figuring out and putting together the crew, real Ocean's 11 style. Like I loved Ocean's 11, so I'm like, I'm gonna write one of those. Yeah. Well, so that's the idea. One guy is like, you're not gonna, this isn't something you can just put in your pocket and walk away with. And so the whole story is her figuring out this massive, impossible plot to steal it. And I'm not going to tell you if she does it or not, because that would ruin the whole story. But
she doesn't have a portable hole like in D&D. Just drop everything in the hole. Whoop,
it would be so cool to do stuff like that in a world with magic, but I have no magic in my world, or no magic in this series. So it was actually a lot more fun to try to figure out how to do this using like physics and all of that, like to do something which is literally an impossibility for someone of her size. She's like 5'3". I modeled her sort of after my wife, who's like a full head and a half shorter than me. So just the idea of this, someone like that picking up something that weighs, I think I clocked it at like 900 kilos. Nice. All of this gold. right? Yeah, exactly. And so, one of the guys on her crew is this guy, like as tall as I am, like twice as wide, like solid muscle. And he's like, yeah, it's going to take 4 of me to make this work. And so it's super interesting to think about how to pull something like that off. And that's something that I've enjoyed about writing Thieves is the difficulty and reality and sort of playing with the two. Like I actually had to call up Hamilton Safe to talk them through this idea for a vault door lock that I had to get to get an actual, engineer. I called him, hey, I need to talk to someone about this. I'm doing research for a book. I'm not trying to pick your locks. and they were super nice. They were super nice about it. I talked to someone who's like, so, you want to do this and this and, change this. But the design and overall works. And it was really interesting. But it's fun to do that. But it's more of a burglar style or a vault as opposed to the more pickpockety street level thief, which is another really fun style to play with.
For sure. Well, it brings up an interesting point. I'd be curious because we've been talking a lot about thieves essentially in their element, like stealing things. But in a lot of fantasy or like in your traditional D&D fantasy, like the rogue, they have skills for that kind of stuff, but usually you find yourself in situations where it's not so much about stealing something, maybe something else is going on, and then they have to kind of apply the charity ends up in a lot of that, where she's not like stealing something, it's not a heist, but it's like more about how can she apply her skills or her mindset or the way that she approaches problem solving or her quick wits or whatever to address this awful, like, oh, we're about to be destroyed by this monstrous thing or whatever's going on. Like that kind of character is going to approach it differently. And so I don't know, have you guys had to experiment with some of those things? Like, have you had situations where you're writing thief characters who are out of their element and then having to kind of adapt and play along, and maybe they don't have, like magic to fling around or like, a lifetime of sword training or whatever. They have to rely on and like adapt what they know how to do to the situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's something that you, as your characters, you throw things at them that they are not prepared to handle. Right. And then you see how because honestly, I'm sure when you sat down to write that scene, you weren't exactly sure how she was getting out of it. She was getting out of it, but you're not exactly sure. And then as you're writing through it, you're like, okay, so this is how they do it. It happens to me all the time with the sniper series I'm working on, where I know the guy figures his way out of some impossible jam, but until I'm sitting there in the moment and sort of thinking how this character would think and see the situation, that's when you see how it goes. And I think that's where, a good writer gets in the head of their characters. And that's when it comes through as, okay, this is how this character would actually escape from this situation or see this situation.
Right.
Even.
Yeah, it's, the character Elagos in my series, he's an infiltrator and kind of like what we would consider a mixed martial artist. So on the surface, he kind of looks like he's great at everything, but later in the series, he gets in a sword fight with like a real trained swordsman and gets absolutely destroyed because there's certain situations that your thieving skills and your intellect just can't get you through. And he nearly loses a wing. And he's like, I guess I need to learn sword fighting. So, when you write the thief character in their element, they can seem like a Mary Sue because, they have the skill set, they have the skills and the intellect to figure out almost every problem they come up against. But then, when they get out of that element, if they end up in combat or they just end up someplace that they don't know how to deal with, it's the Mary Sue concept gets shown to not quite be true pretty quickly.
Right. Exactly.
How's your cocky guy deal with that, Robert?
So he's situations in the other books that we had written where he's not the man for the job, and sometimes he's, like in one situation I can think of. This is in what's going to be book 3, but towards the end, he just jets. He's like, I'm out. Peace. See ya. And he's not there for this part of this thing because he's off, hiding somewhere. Well, a couple of the other thieves are like, okay, well, we're gonna try something. We got cloaks so we can go invisible. Maybe we can help attack. And Tilthan's like, I'm not dealing with that. I'm gonna die.
That's a smart thief right there.
Yep.
Well, and that's kind of the challenge a lot of the time is like any character who really is essentially a pragmatist. There's a lot of situations in a fantasy story where any sane person would opt out, like just be like,
Yes.
"Screw this, I'm not doing this."
They just
So then
nope
you have
their
to
way
like
out.
You have
develop
to
some
trap
kind
them
of
in there.
right. You have
Yep.
to get them stuck into it in some other way. But it's often fun like to have that tension of like, but why? Like, why would I ever do that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool, man. Hard to believe it. We've been talking for 50 minutes now. This has been a ton of fun. Thank you guys so much for joining us or joining me. Stevie's not here. I don't need to use the royal we anymore.
I'm my own man.
Exactly. I do have a life and exist outside of Stevie. As we come down the final minutes, why don't you guys tell us a little bit about your thieves, but instead of what they do, who they are as people, the things that make us as readers connect to them and want to be interested in reading more of their adventures. Joe, why don't you go first on this one?
Oh no. Well, Alagos is of the group called the Silver Blades in my series. Alagos is, like I said, the thief and the infiltrator. He's really got a heart of gold. A lot of the characters in my series they've been wounded in some fashion, and probably none of them hide it as well as he does. You can always trust his motivations are good, but he's downright scary in some situations. Like towards the end of the first book, you got two of the characters are a couple of human teenagers. They've never really been in a fight or anything. They get dragged along on this adventure. So, they're invading this castle, and they think this is like the wildest thing ever. I've never done anything like this. And a guard almost catches them, and Alagos just basically grabs this guy from behind and puts him in a rear naked choke and chokes the guy to within an inch of his life, and leaves the twins sitting there because they've never seen something like this before. And he's just like, well, congratulations, you both just got thrown to the wolves. This is what we do, because to that point he's just been doing diplomacy. He's been schmoozing with nobles, trying to get help for the mission they're on. So they kind of think of him, he's kind of like a playboy. He's a gambler and a sweet talker and everything like that. And then the first time they actually see him get into a fight, he strangles somebody, and they're just like, oh my God. But, he still manages to be merciful. And like I said, it's all in the motivations with him. He doesn't steal to be malicious. He doesn't even steal for a thrill. Sorry to disappoint you, Andy, but he steals to further goals, and his goals are always to protect his siblings and to basically do the will of the gods kind of thing. So he's kind of an oddball for a thief, I have to admit, because you wouldn't see many thieves. Not a lot of people make a thief in D&D and put neutral good on their character sheet. That's him to a T. Because when you look at neutral good as an alignment, it's their primary purpose is to do the right thing, whether it's lawful, or whether it's in this person's interest or these people's interest. They're just like, nope, I do the right thing. It doesn't matter what anybody thinks. And sometimes that makes him do things that probably make people go, wow, okay, I wasn't expecting that out of him.
I like it. And does he show up through the entire series?
Yep, he's in the entire series. He's he ends up, minor spoiler, ends up being Kari's brother-in-law. So he's very close to her through the series. There's times where he disappears into the background, and then there's times where in book 5 she tells everybody basically, I have to go do this solo mission for my deity, and he's like, nope, I'm coming with you. Well, my deity, I don't care what your deity says, I'm coming with you. And he actually ends up saving her life at one point. So, he's willing to put his life on the line to save other people. He's an interesting type of thief.
Very cool. Yeah. Robert, what about tell us a little bit about who this person is, not what they do, who they are.
So Tilthan, at his heart, he really wants to do what's right, even though superficially it might seem like, well, this is only in my self-interest. But he's also he has a humor about him that people around him enjoy. Some of them do, for the most part. But he does lend that kind of comedic relief to some of the more serious situations and kind of helps lighten some of the darker tones that are in our series. And he's just kind of a fun, well, why not? Like there's some situations where they're like, well, can we do this? And Tilthan's like, well, why not? He kind of thinks outside the box and gets ideas that some other people that he works with might not come up with. And so he kind of helps to provide that extra perspective. And he's just kind of an all-around fun character. I've enjoyed writing him.
That's awesome. And Justin, tell us a little bit about Charity.
Yeah, so as a person, I really enjoy writing Charity as a person. She's grown up, like she basically managed to make it into her early 20s, almost never actually stopping to think about what she wanted in life because she's just been surviving. And the very few times she hoped for something or like began to open up or trust somebody, it really didn't go well. So she has a very like, I'm the smallest person around. Everybody's bigger than me. The nobles have money and guards. No one plays fair. Life isn't fair. So more or less anything I do is justified because I'm already at like such a disadvantage. But she's just like always been driven by like tomorrow's needs and just staying alive one step at a time. So right up until she gets dropped into Farshore, and then as that world opens up and the group of characters that she meets in the first book and then sort of forms this, initially they're blackmailed to go do something, but they kind of form this little like ragtag weird family of misfits from the different races in this new continent that really become like just immensely important to her sooner than she realizes it consciously. And so she kind of has to essentially figure, like throughout the course of the series, starts figuring out who she is and how to be someone who actually wants things or cares about people, or essentially she has to like become a whole person really, and not just always be driven by like immediate survival the next step, but so having to deal with that. And then she surprises herself a lot with how she reacts to things, like when her friends are put in danger, or when like she starts to realize like, oh, this thing that I did back here that I was just doing to survive, like now an entire city is in danger of being destroyed because of that thing. And like, I guess that means I should just run away, but I don't think I could live with myself and I don't know what to do with that. So now what? Like she's constantly being placed into these situations where she's having to kind of grow and then figure out what that means. Not because she was not a good person but she just never really had those kinds of experiences. So I don't know. I really enjoy. I enjoy writing her. I enjoy watching her grow up essentially throughout the course of the series, and we're having fun with that.
That's awesome. Well, we are officially out of time. We've got exactly 2 minutes left for all y'all to tell readers, viewers, listeners, watchers, random web surfers where they can find you. So again, we will start with Joe. Where can people find you and your books?
On Amazon, the whole series, Eve of Redemption series is 11 books. It's finished. It's in Kindle Unlimited, or you can buy it on Amazon. You can look up the Silver Blades fan group on Facebook if you want to come in and ask questions or chat about the series. That's about it. I don't have a website or anything at the moment. Very
cool. Robert?
You can find all of my books on Amazon. You can also find on Barnes & Noble the print copies in hardcover and paperback. And then we also have the first book in our series, A Prince's Errand, on Audible. And then our website is www.legendsofkalda.com. We also have a Facebook group. That's the Legends of Kalda Facebook group.
Very cool. Justin?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Amazon for me as well. You can find the first 3 books of the Farshore Chronicles are collected in a box set, which is also available on Audible if you want to hear me narrate it. And then books 4 is out. Book 5 is coming out in 2 days, and then book 6 will be out in early November, and then we'll do another box set at the very, very beginning of next year. So you can look for those as well. And if you want to come hang out with some fun fantasy nerds, you can find my fan group on Facebook. It's the Far Shore Voyagers. If you search that on Facebook, you'll find that. And we have a lot of fun being dumb in there.
Very, very cool. Well, thank you guys so much for joining me. This was a lot more fun than I was expecting.
I'm glad to exceed your low expectations.
Well, I hadn't actually prepared anything. Like I was so busy leading up to the show that I was like, oh shit, I forgot to prepare like questions or something. So I was like, oh, this is gonna suck because I'm gonna have to like pull stuff out of my hat. There we go.
Your bag of holding.
Exactly. But this was great. It was an awesome conversation. And of course, for those of you who want to know where to find me, I will be going live tonight at 6:00 Pacific time on Twitch under Deranged and Questing D&D. We will be continuing. It's the final episode of our season 1 campaign. We're facing off, I'm pretty sure it's an undead pixie monster. I'm not exactly sure because we didn't get told what it was, but it's going to be awesome because we've got an awesome guest player to come from Blackwater D&D. So join us tonight at 6:00. See you then. And of course, see you Thursday for another episode of the Fantasy Fiends show. It's not good night. Good, I don't know, morning, afternoon. What do you say right now? Good something. Have a good rest of